Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 books that had the most transformative impact on his life is cultural historian and astrologer Richard Tarnas, PhD, who is known for his books, The Passion of the Western Mind, Understanding the Ideas that Have Shaped Our Worldview, and Cosmos and Psyche, Intimations of a New Worldview. Richard Tarnas is a professor emeritus at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, where he founded the graduate program in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness. He was also the director of programs and education at Esalen Institute in Big Sur. Richard Tarnas, welcome.
Thank you, Sandy. It's an honor to be with you. It's a great project that you've initiated here.
It is an interesting project, isn't it? It really is. I had no idea how interesting it would be when I first started it. So you wrote in your introduction to your dedicated page on the website that distilling your list of most transformative books down to just 10 was both joyful and challenging. So what strategy did you use to complete the challenge?
Well, I used probably multiple strategies, as we do in life. It wasn't a one size fits all because, we're such varied people. All of us are wide ranging in our interests, and also what we find most transformative spiritually, ethically, intellectually, psychologically, and all those are very intertwined. You can't kind of isolate them. What we find transformative in all those ways can be coming from a number of fields, and I wanted to give some sense of that, honor the ones that certainly had a giant influence on me, and also select ones that I thought would be something that could be passed on to others, that would be more effective, more helpful for them, and not just of personal significance to me and a smaller cadre of specialists, but something that spoke to the wider public.
Well, you have basically gave us some wonderfully long and very informative descriptions of your books, which I really enjoyed reading. We don't have time to, go through the whole of what you wrote, but I would encourage anybody to go to the No BS website and read your dedicated page. And I know the books that we're going to talk about, you've listed them in the order that they were originally published, but also approximately in the same order in which you first read them. And the very first one is such a classic, War and Peace, Leo Tolstoy, which was published in 1869. What was it about this book that made it top of your list?
Well, it probably was the work that awakened me to the richness and depth of great world literature. I was 15 at the time when I began reading it, and I'd read it several times by the time I'd gotten into my early 20s, and actually studied it in a course at Harvard by that point. But and also by that point, I'd read most of everything else that Tolstoy had written. He just seems to me. I think it was one of the great French it was authors. I think it may have been Flaubert in conversation with Turgenev, two great novelists, and they were writing back and forth about this new book that was coming out in installments. And one of them said, "It's as if it's been written by life itself, with capital L." And I think that captures the sense of almost like it's like an impartial exploration, setting forth of all these different kinds of human beings, and doing it with a certain amount of not only deep insight, but also compassion and an appreciation for what it would be to be an old man dying, or a young man dying on the battlefield, or a young woman who is just entering into her society for the first time, and falling in love, 14, 15 years old, and just capturing it with what feels like such authentic truth, so reflective of the men and women, young and old, rich and poor, etc. And it's just also there's a deep spiritual vision that is informing, like, people when they get to certain threshold periods of life, and particularly if facing death or anything that's really existentially significant, they often, after a kind of crisis or a dark night or whatever, there's often a spiritual glimpse of something more, something deeper, something where the sense of divine love, intelligence, enters into the experience so powerfully, and it's written with such authenticity that it actually, I think, has a spiritually uplifting and transforming influence on the reader. I would just say one other thing about this book, because I know we can only spend a couple moments on each one, but many readers are told in advance that, War and Peace is too formidable to take on. It's too big. Well, it's nothing like watching the 7 seasons of Mad Men or The Sopranos or something, or The Crown. It's I suppose The Crown is a little closer in spirit, but it's not like any different than that, except that it's a reading experience. Yes, there's a large number of characters, but they can be kept clear in one's mind with a minimum of effort. But those descriptions of the book as being, well, I just couldn't take it on, it's just too big, etc. I think those are not really necessary cautions. You really can enter into that book knowing that you will be welcomed by that whole world that Tolstoy has set out.
Well, thank you for that. Just so our viewers know that there's several translations, and you actually recommend that of Constance Garnett. So if anyone's looking for that, look for the translation by Constance Garnett. Book number 2, The Brothers Karamazov, Fyodor Dostoevsky, 1880.
So I chose out of what could have been, he has at least 4 really, at the very top of his oeuvre, 4 really great novels, particularly starting with Crime and Punishment, which was a huge influence as well. But I chose The Brothers Karamazov, his final work, which he finished not long before he died. And he really brought to the writing of that book his whole complex self, because what each of the brothers represents is in a way a certain I mean, not to just psychologize this, but it does reflect different parts of who he is. Dostoevsky was a richly complex person, and he was, like Tolstoy, dealing with not only great political issues and humanistic issues and great spiritual issues, but uh, he had complexity in him. He had, the 19th century, in later 19th century in Russia, mid to late, through much of Europe and the United States as well, had very powerful warring factions within the intellectual field, particularly between a more religious, devout, pious perspective, and that often had more of a traditional basis. And then there were other uh, powerful movements, coming out of whether Darwin or Schopenhauer or Marx, that were more atheistic and skeptical, and just saying all there is this world, and and then there's some question as to how deep moral values go. Are they just materialistic, instinctual motivations that are really behind the spiritual, etc.? So all those ideas were really in the air, plus radical political ideas and so forth. And Dostoevsky carried all these in him. And one of the things that I think many great authors do is they articulate the different sides of who they are with equal eloquence and conviction. And they also are able to convey what might be the position that's opposite the one they finally take. They're able to take that position and articulate it with real an appropriate amount of respect and conviction, so that you can see where everybody's coming from. But what Dostoevsky does in the brothers Karamazov is he gives to each of the brothers one of the, and these are very fully realized characters, but one is a mystic, one is a total existential skeptic, existentialist skeptic. Another one is totally driven by instinct and living in the moment for his immediate satisfactions. And each of those brothers, they're recognizable types, but they're also vividly carrying individuality as a human being. And Dostoevsky manages this highly what's been called a dialogical way of having his characters interact. You're always in a dialogue. You're not in a monologue, and that makes for a much more dynamic and interesting exploration.
I loved what you wrote when you said that your father was not very pleased to find that you were reading James Bond, and he urged you to seek out great world literature, and that's how you came across Crime and Punishment. You actually joined an international collectors library book club with your teenage earnings, but the funny part was that you said you were able to purchase both Tolstoy's and Dostoevsky's novels in a reasonably priced but gold-leafed, leather-bound edition that looked like a holy scripture with a sewn-in ribbon, and you were able to use that very naughtily. Tell us.
Well, I went to, at this point, I was still in high school, and my father first, he discovered my collected works of Ian Fleming in my football athletic bag there, hidden in my bedroom. And he was, as you said, he was not particularly delighted with the high level of my cultural aspiration at that point. And he just conveyed to me the importance of using my time in life to read the great literature. And he mentioned some of the Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and of course, we all, as a family, we saw lots of Shakespeare, and so we had that in the background. But anyway, I stumbled on this International Collectors Library, which, as you say, had these really elegant books for relatively low price. I think they were more like about $5 a piece at that point, which would be, more like $50 today or $40. But in any case, with my newspaper earnings and then working in a library, I was able to purchase these one a month, and it was just a great. Yeah, so I'm in a Jesuit high school, and in the senior year, we're going to our annual retreat, and you have to be in the chapel for hours at a time, praying, looking through your prayer book, etc., listening to a sermon, and so having a restless mind, and also just kind of finding this new horizon opening up within this book of crime and punishment. In this case, I the book looked, as even kind of maroon, crimson in color, with a gold leaf top, and then the leather bound, and then it's got the ribbon. And I just put it inside the missal, that it looked quite identical to, with the where the prayers and songs were for the rituals there, and just quietly read Dostoevsky. And as I mentioned in my little description there on your website, I felt like, really, I didn't feel like I was doing the wrong thing. I felt like it was a kind of praying. It was a kind of meditating on the state of my soul, and all the more meaningful for me in doing that. So yeah, that was a good way of reading Crime and Punishment.
Well, yes, and that made your list, and Ian Fleming didn't.
That's right. Yeah, that's one thing, that the difference between a 13-year-old's perception and a well, how old is it? I'm more than 60 years older than that now. But I felt that even when I was like 15 and 16. I just thought, well, this is at a different level.
Yeah. So book number 3 is by an author that you describe as brilliant, complex, overpowering, and must be read with care. The book is Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and of course it is by Friedrich Nietzsche, published in 1883.
Yes. So, well, he started it in 1883 with and then finished the last part in 1885. It came out in a sequence. At that point, Nietzsche, he was writing his books. He had left his job as a brilliant young philologist at a university there in Switzerland, in Basel, and because of illness, he just was not able to. Both illness and, I think, a certain restlessness within the confines of 19th century academia. He writes this at one point. I think it's in Zarathustra. He said, I have slammed the door behind me on my schools. I have not been educated just to crack nuts, and I need to get out where the air is clear, and I'm in the mountains, and I can take in the reality of this earth and have deeper thoughts, which is what he did. So he would walk around every he'd walk around every summer around the Alps in Switzerland, and then he would go to a warmer climate along during the winter along the coast in Italy or France, and write his books. He was quite alone, and that's why Zarathustra does have this quality of solitude. He had fallen in love with Lou Salome, the great, very remarkable writer and thinker, probably 20 years younger than he was at that point. While she regarded him as a friend and a teacher, she did not fall in love with him. And that, the way he was in love with her, that was a huge romantic disappointment. It was really his only great love. and out of that romantic crisis, suddenly, I mean, he was really in despair, and he had also reached a kind of endpoint of his skepticism to the point of a kind of nihilistic view of life. And suddenly, in January of 1883, there are a bunch of clear days in a row, and he just burst forth with this new creativity that had uh, he I think there's something about the figure of Zarathustra that, as Jung might say, it was a living symbol of transformation,
Mm.
and it really had a transformational effect on him to have this figure and this voice where he was able to pour forth something that was in a way coming from the archetypal dimension that he was so in touch with. It's almost like his personality went went into recession, and this other kind of more powerful, more eloquent, more profoundly insightful being took over, and he kind of wrote it in a possession state.
Mm.
But the thing about Nietzsche is that he was pushing the limits of thought, of morality, of spirituality, about as far as you could go, and he uh, farther than anybody had gone before. And as often happens when you're at a frontier like that and you have no examples to build on, uh, he he could drive himself into places where that could be misinterpreted, and they were misinterpreted. And sometimes he also would say things that were over the top, as one does sometimes when you're in a archetypal possession state. And so uh, he, yeah, after he died young, his sister, who was a um, German nationalist anti-Semite, totally took over his work, distorted it, re-edited things, and it really created quite a problem for a lot of the 20th century until later scholars came in and really sorted out what was Nietzsche and the real thing. But it's important to read. I think it's interesting. Thus Spoke Zarathustra is one of the last books in the collected works of the great books of the Western world, as Encyclopedia Britannica used to put out. And I think Nietzsche's Zarathustra, along with I think Freud's interpretation of dreams and Moby Dick, I think those are three of the last books that are in that very patriarchal, patrilineal sequence of very great works, but incomplete, of course, as any such list would be, including my
Mm.
own. But yes, Nietzsche is, he pretty much influenced almost every major European 20th century thinker, and yet
Yeah.
no one was reading him in the later 19th century. That's why he he was publishing his own books, just a few hundred out of his own meager funds, and he was really just writing for himself at that point. But he did also recognize. He said, "I think I was born prematurely. I will be, or rather, I will be born posthumously. That's when I will be read and
Yeah.
understood."
Yeah.
And it's
He was right.
he was right. And in many
Mm.
ways, it's up to us to bring his thought further, refine some of the rough points, and elevate the crucial insights that he really brought to us in advance of anybody else. So Zarathustra is one of my high favorites for sure.
Mm. Well, book number 4 is quite a change here. A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf, published in 1929.
So Virginia Woolf gave these. They were originally 2 lectures that he gave to the women's colleges not too far from you in Cambridge. She was invited to go there in the fall of 1928, and there she gave uh, presentations that just with great cultural authority. I mean, she'd read everything. She knew her Tolstoy. She knew her Dostoevsky. She knew her Shakespeare. Um, but she was, a part of the Bloomsbury group,
Hmm.
a real leader in it, and she had tremendous sense of also moral discernment and a righteous outrage at the prejudicial depreciation of women's potential capacity be uh, to be intelligent, to be full players in the field of culture, while the men were given access. She gives a series of powerful examples of just how, like, she wouldn't be allowed into this one particular library at Cambridge because it was just for men. If you were a woman, you had to be coming in as a guest of a man. And she couldn't go in to check this particular poem by a particular poet that she knew the original was right in this library. And it would be, of all people, there you're keeping out Virginia Woolf because she's not what not sophisticated enough to be able to let into the hallowed halls that only the men were able to go into. I mean, but she explores in this in A Room of One's Own, both gives you a sense for the lineage that she's part of, and the nobility of the women who had came before her and who still are on the front lines, pushing against these resistances and dealing with tragic cultural limitations and often rising above them. But she's also pointing out we may not even have heard of the woman who could have been Shakespeare if she had been a man and not a woman, because as a woman, this thing happened, that thing happened, she got pregnant, she wasn't in wedlock, etc. I mean, she plays that out. And then towards the end of the book, she describes the beautiful way in which she describes the masculine and the feminine sides of the artist's psyche have to come together in a kind of sacred marriage in order for the true creative moment to occur. And when that happens, we can hardly talk about it. We just draw the veils as the secret nuptials take place. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful passage, and you can see how much she captures a point that we certainly recognize coming out of the depth psychology tradition, which is that you have to have both the, whether we call it the yang and the yin, the masculine and the feminine sides of the psyche, both in intimate interplay for there to be true creativity, which of course is also true on the literal biological level as well, in terms of giving birth to a new child.
So we have to take a short break now.
Okay.
You're listening to a No BS Spiritual Book Club interview and sharing the 10 books that had the most transformative impact on his life journey is Professor Emeritus at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco and former Director of Programs and Education at Esalen Institute in Big Sur and author Richard Tarnas. We'll be back with more from Richard Tarnas after this break. Stay tuned.
Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene keys is basically the code book of life. In the gene keys, the book is made up of these three levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those three levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the siddhi. And the siddhis are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Richard Tarnas. They say that time flies when you're having fun. Time is flying by, and we've still got 6 books to go through, and I want to hear about them all. And I also want to, ask you a few questions at the end. So we're going to have to cut our descriptions down even more. So
Right.
number 5.
As you said, people can read my slightly fuller accounts there on the website.
Yeah. So number 5 is The Portable Jung by C.G. Jung, edited and introduced by Joseph Campbell, published in 1971.
So it was difficult to choose which of Jung's many books might be the one to recommend. Many people would choose Memories, Dreams, Reflections, his late in
Many
life
have.
autobiographical memoir. But that's and it's a great one to read. But the great advantage of the one I chose is that it contains portions, or sometimes the entire thing, from each of the major, representing each of his major ideas and the major periods in his life. I think Jung is probably the depth psychologist, and in some ways he helps make psychology deep by unearthing how crucial spirituality is to psychological health, and his recognition that life is a spiritual journey, and that the later stages of life are at least as important as the early stages of life in that spiritual journey, but they have different spiritual demands and opportunities that emerge. And his recognition of the collective psyche, of archetypes, of synchronicities, and so forth. These have really entered into the field of discourse of our larger culture, and he's one of those individuals, like Nietzsche, in a way like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and Virginia Woolf as well. They all were taking in the vast range of literature, philosophy, religious currents that were flowing through their time, their culture's history. Those of us who were educated within the European tradition, who are carrying that history, they took on the responsibility of assimilating all that and then opening up further horizons that could only be opened up by someone who had that full of of enriched a comprehension of what preceded them. And Jung really did that, and he brought in, he had these very powerful experiences in the 19 teens when he was in his 30s during World War I. Extremely powerful experiences where he almost was doubting his sanity at times. But out of this several year period, when he continued to be very active professionally, seeing patients, writing and organizing and so forth, but he found time to let this unconscious material and images, dreams, visions emerge over a several year period with such transformational force, and it came in vivid images and characters and so forth. And as a result, as he put it later, he said, all my later work came out of those several years in the 19 teens when the descent into the underworld took place of his own unconscious, which he came to recognize his own unconscious is in many ways the collective unconscious of our culture, of our humanity, because all of us are human beings. We're all ultimately expressions of the cosmos, and so our deep interior is the interior of collective humanity. Our deepest goes right into the cosmos itself, and that's why synchronicities, for example, could simultaneously bring about represent events that have internal meaning. They might be coming in through a dream, a vision, an insight, but at the same time, something completely that one couldn't have caused, nobody else is causing it, happens in the external world that perfectly mirrors what's gone on in the inner world, as if the outer world of nature is intelligently orchestrating a force of coincidence that wakens us up to the fact that something more is going on in life than purely random evolving circumstances of no meaning signifying sound and fury. I mean, it's rather there are deeper spiritual meanings at work in life, and that there may even be deeper kind of orchestrating intelligence that is helping to order life in such a way to provide us with opportunities to become more conscious, more skillfully participants in the spiritual adventure of our life. So he brought in many insights like this, and I recommend the portable Jung, because Joseph Campbell did a great job of collecting all these excellent works, going right from the early works on that, where you get introduced to the stages of life, or of archetypes, the nature of archetypes, the nature of the collective unconscious, and going right up to the later works on synchronicity, and particularly this amazing work, essay that he wouldn't change one word of, the only one he ever wrote that he wouldn't change one word of, and that's called Answer to Job, which is his most prophetic work about the spiritual evolution of our critical time. So yeah, that's Jung.
That's Jung. Yeah. Number 6 is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, 1962. I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to kind of pare this down to what was the impact that the book had on you, rather than,
The big picture.
The big picture, yeah.
All right. So I was 18 when I first started reading Kuhn. he was assigned at Harvard. Both his first book called The Copernican Revolution, and then The Structure of Scientific Revolutions is the one I've recommended. That's the one that's probably had the most influence, certainly the most cited book that has affected people in both the sciences and the humanities and in religious circles over the last 60 years or so since it was published. Kuhn recognized that we are always seeing through our perceptual lenses that can be seen as paradigms that have been established over years by scientific communities or by an artistic community, like a paradigm that would be, say, representational or impressionist or whatever is the abstract, etc. And that then the creators, the scientists, the researchers work within that paradigm until new material comes in, new data that is difficult to fit into the old structure of belief that had been organizing one's research or creativity, and suddenly there's someone comes through with a kind of Promethean breakthrough, a new insight that is able to both recognize what was valuable in the old paradigm, but just say how we had to open it up to take in this new anomalous data and get a larger vision. And in doing that, he helped to relativize, because he was a philosopher of science and an historian of science, he was able to relativize the tremendous authority of science, continuing to hold its authority, but recognizing that it too is an interpretation, and that science is playing its role just as religion, art, and other realms of human activity are all players in the larger complexity of human life. So he really played a big role in helping to open up our cultural conversation with greater insight and greater historical understanding.
Book number 7 is a book that you say has informed your work ever since you first read it. It is Realms of the Human Unconscious, Observations from LSD Research, Stanislav Grof, published in 1975.
So I first read this in manuscript form. I had come from Harvard to Esalen Institute to meet Stan Grof, hoping to just spend a couple weeks learning from him, because I had heard through work that something that Abraham Maslow had said and others, that this remarkable Czech psychiatrist, trained as a psychoanalyst and in the traditional scientific mode, through his experiences working with thousands of patients over many years, using various psychedelic substances, particularly LSD, but other psychedelics, were that he was able to not only create a very powerful paradigm of therapeutic transformation that was unusually effective in working with a wide range of patients, but more than that, that he was able to, that the deeper one went into the psyche and even into psychological suffering and psychopathology, one was able to tap into the deeper spiritual and even mystical dimensions of life that informed the human psyche and even provided healing potential for the person who might be psychologically suffering. And I was just so impressed that anybody who's working with such powerful substances, I had worked with various people, like the Haight-Ashbury Drug Clinic in San Francisco, or I'd worked in the inner city of Detroit working with heroin addicts. And I knew the power of these very different types of substances, the sacred medicines, the vision plants, the psychedelics. Anybody that could do that excellent a work and also be able to recognize a larger map or cartography of the human psyche that fully assimilated the great treasures of Hindu, Buddhist, Taoist, shamanic indigenous wisdom with the most advanced Western psychological and psychiatric ideas, and the latest ideas in quantum physics and so forth like that, because Groff had such an encompassing curiosity and capacity to integrate. I really wanted to meet this person, and having met him, I, like many others, recognized that he's no ordinary human being. We still have him with us. He's 93 years old now, living in Germany, and I talk to him every week. He's very, very special being, but I really needed to carry that. I wanted to be able to share with you the importance of Groff's work, Groff being really the founder of transpersonal psychology. And as many of us recognize, he is a noble successor to the sequence of great, certainly to Freud and Jung, who preceded him and influenced him, but in certain ways he goes even beyond. So my next choice was James Hillman's Revisioning Psychology. James Hillman, like Stan Groff, I would view as the two most creative and important psychologists since Jung in many ways. Each is the founder of a school. They both have been deeply influenced by both psychoanalysis and Jungian psychology. They're both widely read, very literate, very deep people, but very different. Hillman's perspective is much more it's much more Western and European focused. He's a marvelous writer, but he's the person who particularly brought the word soul back into the discussions of psychology, and points out that the very word psyche means soul. And if we're talking about psychology, we better be talking about the soul. Otherwise, we should be talking about animal behaviorism, statistics, or some kind of cultural anthropology. But psychology should be focused on the deep meanings of the soul. And he was a founder of the school within Jungian thought called archetypal psychology. And he really is, I think, our most eloquent writer in psychology of the last half century, and influenced a great number of people, thinkers, artists in different fields, intellectuals, and so forth. So yeah, Hillman's Revisioning Psychology is his great manifesto of the archetypal perspective and capturing the depths of the Western European imaginative tradition. Now,
can I just say that books 9 and 10, you've said, are the ones that have most shaped your thinking during the past decade, and you regard them as essential reading for anyone who wishes to understand who we are as a civilization and as a species. I don't think that we have an awful lot of time to say much more than that.
Well, I'll just say that both Robert Bella's Religion and Human Evolution and Jung's we see we have 5 minutes. You'll have to trim that.
Bella and Taylor we're talking about, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
So let me just move back to that. Robert Bella's Religion and Human Evolution and Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, both published by Harvard University Press in the last 20 years. And they are our finest overviews, I believe, of the interior history of humanity and what has led to where we are today in terms of our spiritual, our social understanding. They do it with such scholarly detail, but also true spiritual insight, and they're great models of excellent scholarship I can't recommend them enough. They do. You need to. They're both big books, but they are well worth it. And I would regard them as endlessly worthwhile for your studies, for our basically our cultural and spiritual self-understanding today as a civilization, as a species, especially at this crucial moment of transformation that we are in history and evolution.
Well, I have to say, Richard, I think that your list is one of the most, what I would call, meatiest. Very, very deep, very important, and the kind of books that you can really lose yourself in. And but let me ask you this question. You studied and taught with some amazing luminaries at Esalen: Stanislav Grof, Joseph Campbell, Gregory Bateson, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and James Hillman. Now, I sometimes ask people if they had the opportunity to dine with one of the authors they've been speaking about, who might it be? Well, you've probably dined with all of those. Outside of those, which of your authors that you've mentioned tonight would you most like to sit down and have dinner with?
That's a good question. I'd love to sit down with so many of them.
Pick one.
Well, of these authors, I think I probably want to talk with Jung. He died. I think we'd have a very good conversation. We'd have a lot to talk about. He's appeared in a number of my dreams. He even gave me a hug in one on a dark winter night in the dream. And but I felt I feel a certain connection to him, and I believe we'd be able to discuss a lot of things that he would understand where we are in our history right now. And I think he'd also be eager to hear the developments that have happened since he died in 1961, as I would be eager to hear his insights, because he really was a very profound spirit of the 20th century.
I want to be a fly on the wall when you have dinner with him. Richard, we've got to leave it there, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry. And I'm so sorry that I disappeared in the middle of all of this. But I will be able to watch the recording.
Yeah.
So thank you, Richard. Before we leave, can you just tell our audience where they can find out more about you?
Well, you can go to, YouTube has many of my lectures, just different people have posted them there. So they're there. You just look under Richard Tarnas, there's different lectures. And there's also many, I continue to keep giving lectures. I am going to eventually get a website. I have a website called cosmosandspsyche.com. Which I have not attended to too much during my years of teaching full time. But now that I'm retiring, I'd like to be putting more in there. But even as it is, there are essays there that they can read. There's links to videos or interviews that I've done. But as I say, you can just go on YouTube. There's a one website in YouTube, a channel called Archetypal View that someone runs named Chad Harris, who has recorded a lot of my lectures. You can find a lot there. But
okay, Richard, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to talk to you another time about your astrology work, but that's it for this show, I'm afraid. Please go to the website and you can read all of Richard's descriptions for these books. That's it for this week. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Richard Tarnas.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.